What's up, guys? First of all, thank you for subscribing me up to 20K subscribers. It's actually 21 now, but I've been out of the game for a minute. I had to travel for a funeral and then go to about 16 different orientations for my oldest starting kindergarten. It's kind of real out here these days. Anyway, I haven't had much of a chance to make videos, but I do appreciate all the subscribers. So stay tuned for more about that at the end. I want to do something cool as well as some more housekeeping for the channel. But anyway, let's get into it. So why do smart people sometimes underperform in the gym? That's certainly not always the case. Life isn't like a video game where you get a certain number of stats, and if you want to boost one, you have to, make another dump stat, right? There's plenty of people who are both very smart and very jacked, and also plenty of people who are very dumb and very weak, right? And then there are plenty of people who are not smart but make being smart, part of their identity. Trans smarts, if you will. It's 2025 now, but unfortunately, that problem is as old as humanity. Anyway, nevertheless, there's an archetype of people who are genuinely smart but seem to have trouble applying that problem solving capability to the gym. And I think that's worth talking about because honestly, we can all fall victim to that to a certain degree, even folks who are actually very successful in the gym. So, the trap that I'm talking about, which appeals to people who are smart or at least think they are, is wanting to understand everything. Wait, what? Why is wanting to understand things bad? Well, it isn't. Of course, we should want to understand things, right? That's obviously not a bad thing in and of itself. But here's the problem. When we try to exercise, we're obviously not holding like the whole of what goes into training in our heads at once, right? That would be impossible. Our working memories can contain about seven plus or minus two items according to psychologists, right? So we have about seven things in our heads at a given time. For the average person, obviously there's a lot more than seven things to go into training, right? Instead, we're breaking it down into concepts, right? Simple ideas that model our understanding of aspects of what goes into exercise and progression. And that's a good thing because, of course, it allows us to take something that really can be almost infinitely complex. I mean, if you think about it, we could break down everything that happens to the level of every atom in our bodies, right? But obviously, that'd be completely unworkable. So what we do instead is take what we see and organize it into manageable chunks that we can easily think about, explain to others, and use to inform our training decisions, right? And that works, right? And that's why we do it. But any model is going to be a simplification of the real thing, right? So whenever we emphasize models, concepts excessively, there's going to be real life information that's not factored into the models that we're using at a given time that's going to be left out. So the key is using them enough and in the right way, but not emphasizing them excessively. I'll get into kind of how to do that later. As you can imagine, smart people, or maybe in some cases smart identifying people, but in a lot of cases genuinely smart people who like thinking and understanding stuff, are going to tend to fall into the trap of overdoing it. So what does that look like? Taking, concepts, not bad concepts, mind you, but concepts that are valuable, um, and does describe an important aspect of lifting, and then overemphasizing it. Right, that's what it looks like. Getting tunnel vision on one particular concept, valuable though it may be, and ignoring other stuff. A good example here, I think, is the phenomenon that basement bodybuilding has described as progressive overload anxiety. I think he's done a really great job of detailing the problem, and it's a perfect example of how this works. People learn that adding weight to the bar, adding reps over time is important. That's what we call progressive overload. And that is a useful concept to keep in mind in order to understand what progress in the gym is going to look like, right? Arguably one of the most important, right? So people find out about that and naturally make adding weight to the bar, adding reps each session their top priority in the gym, right? But what Basement has described, in a lot of cases, they end up cheating more. They alter their technique away from what would be the most optimal for hypertrophy. So even though they may be getting more weight for more reps over time, that may not actually represent the progress that they think it does because the reps and weight that they have earlier in the logbook are not directly comparable to the ones that they're doing now, right? So while I like his description of the problem, I don't necessarily love his solution to it nearly as much because that's basically rigorous attention to just keeping the technique the same so we don't end up with tracking issues. And I don't like that so much because, frankly, there are a lot of exercises where I don't particularly like to keep my technique consistent. Not all, certainly not all exercises, right? But there are plenty, particularly lighter bodybuilding work. Again, not all light bodybuilding work, just certain exercises where I do like to let my technique get sloppier as the set goes on. And I get that as you alter your technique, all things being equal, you're reducing the tension on the given muscle, but all things aren't necessarily equal, right? Just lower the weight and use strict form. Nah, I don't necessarily feel my biceps working as much with a weight that I can do, 10 perfectly strict bicep curls with as one where I can do like five strict and then five with some swing, right? And if I did 10 perfectly strict bicep curls with a lower weight, I'd still probably want to do five more with some swing after that, right? So why can't I do that, right? Well, you need to keep your technique consistent so you can track your progress, right? And that way you actually know when you're getting better. Well, here we get another big picture of principle tracking, which like knowing where you are is important, right? It is important to track your progress over time so you can tell if you're improving or not. I agree, but I think the idea that we have to know with that much precision exactly how much better we're getting on every single exercise, potentially at the expense of effort and intensity, that's also a little bit of tunnel vision, right? And now Baseman is a smart guy, and I'm not accusing him of being unsuccessful in the gym. He has bigger biceps than I do, right? So I'm not saying he's unsuccessful. Um, he's clearly balancing intensity with tracking and overload and everything, right? So I'm not attacking him here. It's more where his idea is going and maybe how other people might apply that. I'm not saying he trains like that, right? Um, but I think a great example of that mentality gone wrong would be, of course, Mike Israel, right? Every single rep has to be exactly the way that he thinks it should, and if he can't do another rep that meets that standard, he calls it, right? Which may be, uh, you know, 8 reps in reserve, right? And again, I'm not saying basement trains like Mike Israel. Clearly, he does not. Okay, but that's where the idea, we have to keep our technique consistent in order to track progress. Can potentially lead if we get tunnel vision on that idea, right? None of the technique cyborgs have any gains, and Mike would not have any gains if it hadn't been for insane amounts of gear and like God knows what else he's into. I mean, he's on some weird stuff these days. Worshiping the Chat GPT and all. I mean, all manner of. I mean, who knows what he's on, man? He probably. I believe he's probably on more gear than Liver King, to be honest with you. But anyway, I hope you guys get the distinction between I don't love Basement's conceptual solution to the problem and Basement trains like this and his training's bad. I hope you guys get that distinction, right? Um, and since right, I'm not trying to attack him in this video. I'm just clarifying that it's not an attack, right? I'm talking about him because he brought up a really good example, right? You guys hopefully are getting the distinction. But anyway, it's convenient that I'm bringing him up so much because Basement Bodybuilding is sponsored by Barbell Apparel. And Basement Bodybuilding also lives in Canada. So that's really convenient because he's probably wearing a wonderfully soft, stylish Barbell Apparel hoodie right now. The reason that's important is that Barbell Apparel is having a free hoodie sale. It's going on right now. Any order over $99 gets you a free hoodie. Now, they sent me some already, and they're really really nice, but unfortunately I can't wear one right now because it's hot as balls in California. That's not where, so I'm not wearing a shirt at all. But just picture Basement Bodybuilding all cozy in the wilds of Canada in his igloo in a very cozy Barbell Apparel sweater, and go ahead and order yourself one. You won't regret it. So anyway, um, we just got on the subject of technique with Mike Israel and whatnot. And again, Basement's technique is always it's good. I think the way he was describing that may not be advantageous to every person who's hearing it and might take it the wrong way, right? But this is a quibble, right? I'm not attacking. But yeah, we're on the subject of technique, so that's where this excessive focus on top down concepts is really apparent, right? What even is good technique, right? Stuff like full range of motion, controlled negatives, pause at the bottom, isolate the muscle you're trying to work, don't let other muscle groups help too much, squeezing at the top, mind muscle connection, all this stuff. And every single one of these concepts is valuable. I use every single one of them in my training. They're all good concepts, right? And yet, one of my very favorite developmental exercises, one that you can see the results of in this very video, in fact, probably most everything I do, because it's one of the more salient body parts I have, power shrugs, right? It's a fantastic developmental exercise, and it goes against all of them. It's completely the contradiction of every single one of those principles of good technique that I just described, right? And yet it works. It worked for me. I get tons of DMs saying, thank you for introducing me to the power shrugs. My traps are blowing up. They work better than anything else I've ever tried. I mean, Basement himself, Basement Bodybuilding, does these, and I brought him up as an example of someone who tends to be more on the strict side of things, but obviously he does whatever works, right? He's nuanced and thinks about this stuff, and when a technique that doesn't fit all those kind of preconceptions of what strict would look like works, he does it. And you see, maybe I'm trying. I think I'm being a little too defensive and sensitive about like now it's starting to be. I'm not like I feel like I don't know. It was like a good example, so I wanted to use it in the video, but now I feel like I was too negative. I wasn't though. Like whatever. I'm psyching myself out on this. I'm going to stop now. But anyway, yeah, Basement advocates for them. Pretty much every noble natty does. Um, yeah, I mean anyone who obviously like Steve Shaw, Alex Leonidas, although he also does his rack pulls. A lot of these, anyone who's anyone who's kind of going with what works instead of being really top down and conceptual, right? So power strokes clearly work in the real world, but you can't get folks like Mike Israetel or Jeff Nippard to consider them because these are people who work strictly from concepts that they understand and value to reality. They don't allow reality to provide any feedback, right? They're strict rationalists, never empiricists if you're one of the people with philosophical inclinations, right? If there's not a conceptual reason why something should work according to their worldview as it stands, they're not even going to try it. They're going to dismiss it on the spot, right? And there are, I guess, conceptual reasons why power strokes should work. There's things like overloading the stretch, smoothing out the resistance curve, things of that nature, right? And I'll mention them, but I try to be a little cautious of confidently just pronouncing power strokes work because of the stretch and resistance curve, right? I'd rather say they obviously work, and here are some explanations that I've heard that sound plausible, right? I know that's kind of unsatisfying to a lot of people who want a little bit more concrete answers, but there's this temptation to find out, figure out why power strokes work and apply those principles to every other body part. But for the most part, that doesn't seem to work very well. Like, trust me, I've tried. It doesn't work. In most cases, ridiculously heavy cheat movements where other muscles are creating a lot of momentum are not that effective for most body parts, right? Like, we want to seek out universal principles that apply to all exercises, but the reality is that doesn't usually work so well. It ends up being kind of analogous to like the Soviet Union, or not the actual Soviet Union, but kind of the whitewashed version of the Soviet Union that we learn about in history class, where like top-down centralized planning didn't account for the particularities of local situations, and as a result, things got really bad, and a lot of people, I don't know if I'm allowed to say the S word, but the thing where people don't have food, and what eventually happens when people don't have food for like a long time, not like fasting, but like unintentional, like government caused long, like permanent fasting, shall we say? I don't know, am I allowed to say that on YouTube? Anyway, right? I say whitewashed because well, it was whitewashed, right? Even though we were enemies with the Soviets during the Cold War, we were allies with them when they were committing their worst atrocities. Now, honestly, by the time we were enemies with them, they chilled out a lot, and maybe that economic model of they're just incompetent actually worked a lot better. But at the time that we were allies with them, yeah, no, not at all. They You can't cover up the numbers of people that they are responsible for. That cannot be covered up. Um, but what the education system, the propaganda system has done is has done a really good job of making it seem like incompetence, like something that just happened because communist economics were just that bad. Like, oops, we can't farm because we're stupid communists. Oops, there went 60 million people or so. I mean, I'm not getting committed to an exact number, but 60 million is a good number, right? Maybe that's the right number, maybe more, maybe less, who knows? Oopsie, 60 million people gone. We can't farm. We're communists, right? That's kind of the whitewash, right? It's incompetence. But the reality is it had almost nothing to do with economic policy. It was just, I'm not even trying to be like judgmental. It was just pure evil and insanity. That's the only way you can describe it. The best way to explain what actually happened was if chaos cultists from Warhammer 40K took over a real life country and then it conquered all its neighbors. Just that's exactly what happened. I'm not exaggerating at all. It was that over the top. Like, you couldn't take any of this stuff seriously if you read it in a novel. Like, not in the George R. R. Martin era. Like, everybody's got to have their own perspective, shades of gray, all that good stuff. No one's truly good or evil. No, these people are evil and worse. Like, they were everything that you would think of as the forces of hell minus all the cool stuff, like like horns and wings and stuff, right? So yeah, anyway, if Warhammer 40K chaos cultists took over an area, presumably they'd have to be operating the economy in some type of way to keep things functional enough to conquer everything else, right? But their economic policy would not necessarily be the first thing that we'd focus on explaining, to explain like what happened in the situation, right? There might be other things that'd be a little bit more salient, right? And that's not to defend communist economics or to attack it for that matter. It's just kind of an interesting side note on how history is presented that's totally irrelevant to the topic of this video, which I will now get back to. So anyway, the like top down theory, heavily centralized planning leading to disaster, whitewash, it works as propaganda because it's plausible, right? And again, I'm not saying there's no truth to it at all, just that emphasizing that so much is a little bit misleading. Kind of like if like the main thing that we learned about Charles Manson was that he stole some cars, like, it's true, but right, you get it. Anyway, the main point being it's plausible because we can all think of examples where this kind of top down big picture thinking goes awry when applied to the particularities of specific situations, right? And that's what tends to happen when we fixate too much on any of these big universal principles of exercise technique. The general theory doesn't always fit the particularities of a specific exercise, right? So people who tend to do a lot of principles first thinking tend to have blind spots where the principles don't work so well, kind of like Jeff with his traps. Although, like to be honest, he trains in a very he trains like an empiricist, which by that I mean a bro in a lot of ways. I think just for him, power strokes are just a little bit of a bridge too far from his like bodybuilding and science based priors. But honestly, he does train like a bro in a lot of areas, and he's jacked in almost every other area. His traps are fine. Yeah, I'm picking on them. They're not bad, but they could be better, especially with his amazing genetics. I'm gonna say he has amazing trap genetics. He just hasn't realized it. Prove me wrong, Jeff. Take a DNA test. No, I'm just kidding. Do some power shrugs. Anyway, another issue that we tend to see, another manifestation of this issue that, and this doesn't apply to Jeff at all, by the way. This is skinny people who are convinced that they've hit their genetic natural limits because they've done everything that they believe works to build muscle. But the reality is they've just hit their knowledge limits because they've never tried anything outside of what they currently believe works because they don't have a reason to think any of it will work based on their current theoretical framework, right? It's very rare that like generalizations apply universally to everyone, but it's very common that what you see with people who think they have bad genetics is a need to be convinced that something works before doing it, right? Whereas people who tend to be more successful, people who tend to be more optimistic about their ability to make progress, those things are correlated, by the way. These tend to be the people who understand that there's a lot outside of what they currently know, and as a result, if they learn more, they can grow more, right? So, what am I advocating for? I'm not advocating for quit overthinking it. It's simple, just pick up heavy things. A lot of people say that, not my favorite thing. Now, some people who are just plagued by overthinking need to be told that, but it's not my favorite mentality overall. And it's actually the rationalists, the people who do like to think about stuff using big concepts and principles, who actually end up simplifying things. To the guy who thinks that he's skinny because of bad genetics, lifting is simple. It's so simple that he's already done everything that he could possibly do to grow, at least in his mind, right? No, we should accept and embrace the complexity and understand that our concepts are never going to fully model actual reality, right? That's not to say they can't be very useful. I'm not advocating for not thinking about stuff at all and just operating on instinct. I mean, that can work very well for some, but not everyone has great instincts, right? We should definitely think conceptually, just don't confuse the models with the reality itself. And I'm not even going to try to get into the Baudrillard stuff here. Those of you who know who that is, yeah, don't let this shit become like a third order simulacra or whatever. But the rest of you, I'm not even going to get into it. Yeah, we should use our concepts, our theories as valuable hypothesis generating tools. Like for example, so emphasizing peak tension in the lengthened portion of the lift seems to help. Cool. So which exercise does that best for hamstrings? Let me try that and see if it works for me, right? But don't forget to actually test your hypothesis and see if it works for you the way that your model predicted it would. That's kind of the important part. Because if it doesn't, there's something that you're missing, right? And you should also be willing to try stuff even if you don't know that it's going to work. You don't have to do it forever, but if somebody swears by something, even if you don't see a reason why it would work, again, maybe there's something you're missing, right? Today we tend to bash the old school like monkey see, monkey do approach of copying the biggest guy in the gym, but a lot of people learned a lot that way. And I still think that should make up a certain percentage of the stuff that you try in the gym, stuff you don't necessarily think should work, but you saw someone big or successful, like really swearing by it. If the conceptual framework that you have right now is so good, then experimenting with stuff from outside of that will just demonstrate how very right and correct your framework is. But more likely, you're going to learn something from outside of it, right? And maybe later you'll find a compelling explanation for why that thing that you didn't think would work actually did. And maybe the explanation will even be true, or maybe it's not. But either way, who cares? If you got bigger from it, doesn't matter if it's true. You don't always have to understand to get bigger, right? Um, so yeah, be willing to try stuff, not to rush to judgment, right? One of the biggest issues with the rationalist mindset is that people feel like they can and even should assess an argument and come to a conclusion immediately based on the merits of the argument. It almost feels wrong in a way to hear an argument and not either agree or disagree. But it's not, right? I mean, okay, sure. In theory, if you do have all the facts of the matter and they're presented in a logically correct structure, then you can't deny the conclusion without being irrational. Sure, in theory. But in the real world, making sure we actually have all the facts of the matter, it's devilishly tricky, right? So it can be a really valuable skill to practice just listening to an argument and trying to understand it without being immediately convinced or immediately rejecting it. Just let it sit, maybe test it out, see what other information pops up in the fullness of time. This is an insanely valuable ability to have both in the gym and in life. All right, so you guys get what I'm talking about by now. I think I've communicated about as well as I can, at least in the time that I have. I guess my communication ability must be at least halfway decent, hopefully, since over uh, 21,000 of you have decided to subscribe. I really appreciate that very much, and I'll try to keep getting my communication abilities better. I'm using a different program to record. Hopefully, that fixes the issues. My mic is good. Um, but I think it was just the app I was using to record that was the issue. So hopefully it's better this time. But anyway, I'll keep trying to improve. So in the tradition of YouTube Fitness, we typically do a Q&A for big milestones. So this time I'd like to do a live Q&A for 20K. So I'm going to get some questions beforehand to make sure I have some material prepared so there's not any dead air. But I think it's going to be more fun if I can then, riff off your live follow-up questions. We can go down whatever rabbit holes you guys are interested in. So I'm going to put a link in the description for you guys to just pick the times that you want it. Just fill in whatever times you most want it to be, and I'll go with whatever's most popular. Then when I pick a time, I'm gonna make a community post announcing it. So check my page for that, and you can also put some questions there, so I have some pre-prepared material. And another big channel announcement, I'm actually going to be doing something for my channel membership. I apologize to everybody who already subscribed earlier. I had big plans for getting tutorials out, but then I put that off for a while because I got sidetracked doing other stuff. That's one of the biggest issues I'm dealing with right now is trying to figure out what needs to be my top priority. I've always got a bunch of stuff that I really ought to be doing that I'm not getting to. But anyway, from now on, the membership on my channel will actually come with some real tangible value in the form of exercise tutorials. I've already uploaded my series on Jefferson curls. I've got detailed tutorials on everything from the most basic technique that I would teach to beginners to troubleshooting so you can fix your own issues, advanced variations to emphasize the different movement qualities that are covered by the Jefferson curl in more individual detail. And then finally, the technique that I use in my own training to allow for a little bit more loadability and intensity without sacrificing much, if any, of the essential qualities that are present in the basic technique, right? And that's just the start. I've got about 80 like detailed exercise tutorials that I've already made for use by my coaching clients. I just have to get them up on here. I'm going to try to upload them in batches each week until I get them all up. And by then I'll have made more. And any paying members to my channel at every level are going to get access to them. I may at some point do something like hire tier members, get them first or something like that. But right now, I don't have it set up that way. Everyone gets them. But obviously, if you're doing well financially, you think a bunch of detailed tutorials that are difficult or even impossible in many cases to find anywhere else would be of value to you. It'd be real swell of you to, choose one of those higher levels if you can. But anything is appreciated, right? I think that'll be a good option also for people who want like technical, detailed exercise information from me, but would prefer to manage their own training. Not everybody wants training. That's something that I totally get and respect that independence, but you still might want just good quality information. So that's a value proposition that I have for you. Now, for those who do want coaching, I do offer that at several levels. You can sign up on my intake form in the description. You can email me. You can contact me on Insta, do whatever. I'm thinking about getting a group thing going in the next couple months, kind of focused on maintaining consistency and getting your workouts in as much as possible to progress. Despite just a busy, hectic schedule, I've been barely getting in my own workouts recently with everything going on. But I'm trying to get back on track right now, and I want to invite those of you who are interested in doing the same to kind of join me in that. In addition to the standard online coaching stuff, I want to have like a little group chat where we can log how many workouts we get each week, maybe even compete on that a little bit. And then also do weekly group calls where we share our experiences, challenges, tips for overcoming them and stuff. I thought that'd be a good way for me to help model and share strategies for dealing with some of the stuff life can throw at us to get us off track in addition to helping with the more, technical exercise related stuff. I mean, I've kind of more focused on, I guess, my experience with unconventional lifts and, different techniques and stuff. But I think honestly, probably the greater amount of value that I have to give the average person really is just in like how to get this done with a busy life. I mean, I'm doing this, older than I should be for a fitness influencer, if you can call where I'm at that. Way more kids than I ought to have trying to do this thing, and so that's some value that I think I have, and I think that this would be a good format to share that in. So anyway, if you're interested in something like that, there's an option in my intake form for it. All right, guys, thanks for watching.